The man caught stealing from her store didn't run. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to hide what he had done. Instead, he stood there with a backpack full of groceries and looked like someone who had already lost the fight long before anyone stopped him. Seattle was cold in the kind of way that settled into your bones and refused to leave. Rain tapped softly against Daniel Brooks's windshield as he sat outside another auto repair shop staring at another rejection email. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." The message was polite. They always were. 3 months earlier, the garage where Daniel had worked for nearly 11 years had shut down after the owner retired unexpectedly. Since then, he had applied everywhere: construction companies, repair shops, delivery services, warehouses, anywhere willing to hire a 34-year-old mechanic with a sore shoulder and an aging truck. Most never called back. The few that did chose someone younger, cheaper, or available immediately. Daniel closed the email. The gas gauge sat dangerously close to empty. His checking account contained enough money to be technically positive and practically useless, and at home, his mother needed groceries. More specifically, she needed the groceries she kept pretending she didn't need. Margaret Brooks was 68 years old, stubborn enough to frighten medical professionals, and currently managing diabetes and early-stage heart failure through a combination of medication, optimism, and selective listening. Whenever Daniel asked if she needed anything, she smiled and said she was fine. Whenever he opened the refrigerator, reality disagreed. That evening he returned home carrying a bag containing exactly one discounted loaf of bread. Margaret was sitting in her favorite chair watching an old black-and-white movie. "You eat?" he asked. "Of course." Daniel opened the refrigerator. The milk carton was nearly empty. The yogurt had expired. Half the vegetables had disappeared. Something felt wrong. Later, while taking out the trash, he found it. A sealed container of soup, 2 pieces of untouched chicken, a banana, perfectly good food, thrown away. His chest tightened. Margaret stepped onto the porch behind him. "Don't start. You skipped dinner." "I wasn't hungry." "You threw away food." "I didn't want it." "You didn't want it because you wanted me to eat." Margaret sighed. "Daniel." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Rain dripped from the porch roof. Neither moved. Finally, Margaret smiled sadly. "You've always been a terrible liar." "So have you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out and squeezed his arm. "We'll figure it out." Daniel nodded. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure that was true. At 9:30 that night, he drove to Carter Market. The store glowed warmly against the rain-dark parking lot. Inside, customers pushed carts through bright aisles, while soft music played overhead. Normal life, the kind that looked easy from a distance. Daniel grabbed a basket: milk, low-sugar soup, whole-grain bread. A few items safe for his mother's condition. Then he added over-the-counter medication she had been stretching for days. At checkout, he inserted his debit card. The machine processed, paused, then flashed red. Transaction declined. Daniel tried again. Same result. A woman behind him shifted impatiently. His face burned. "Sorry," he muttered. He removed the medication first, then the bread, then the soup, until only the milk remained. The card was still declined. Daniel stood there staring at the screen. The cashier offered an uncomfortable smile. "It's okay. It happens." But it didn't feel okay. Not tonight. Not after finding food in the trash. Not after another rejection email. Not after months of pretending things would improve soon. He walked away from the register. Past frozen foods. Past household supplies. Past every version of himself that had once believed hard work was enough. For several minutes he wandered the aisles, then stopped. Milk, soup, bread. The same items sat in front of him. Simple things, necessary things. Nothing luxurious, nothing selfish. Daniel stood there so long an employee asked if he needed help. "No," he said. The lie tasted bitter. A few minutes later, he slipped the items into his backpack. Every movement felt wrong. Every step toward the exit felt worse. His pulse hammered. He hated this, hated himself, hated the desperate arithmetic that had brought him here. The automatic doors were only 10 feet away. Then someone touched his shoulder. "Sir." Daniel stopped. A security guard. Another employee beside him. No anger. No shouting. Just certainty. Daniel closed his eyes. For one brief moment he considered running, then immediately hated that thought too. Slowly, he removed the backpack. "Come with us." He nodded. Upstairs in a small office overlooking the sales floor, Sophie Carter watched the security footage. 28 years old, owner of Carter Market, daughter of the founder. She had spent the evening reviewing store operations and inventory reports when the theft alert appeared. The footage didn't show a criminal. It showed a man standing motionless in front of a shelf for nearly 5 minutes before making the worst decision of his week, maybe his year. Sophie walked into the office where security had brought him. Daniel sat quietly in a chair. Rainwater still clung to his jacket. The backpack rested on the table. Milk, soup, bread, nothing else. No alcohol, no electronics, no expensive products, just survival. The guard spoke first. "We should call the police." Daniel lowered his head, then quietly said, "Please don't call my mother." The room fell silent. "She thinks I'm still doing okay." Something about the sentence landed heavily. Not because it excused what he'd done, it didn't, but because Sophie suddenly understood that his humiliation had started long before tonight. She opened the backpack herself. Inside she found a folded piece of paper. A handwritten list: milk, low-sodium soup, diabetes medication, heart-healthy foods. Next to several items were check marks and prices carefully written in pencil. The handwriting wasn't his. It looked older. Sophie glanced at him, then back at the list, then at the groceries. For a long moment she said nothing. Finally, she pulled out a chair and sat across from him. The security guard looked confused. Daniel looked exhausted. Sophie folded her hands. "If I let you walk out of here tonight," she asked quietly, "what happens next week when she needs food again?" Daniel had no answer, and somehow that frightened him more than being caught. Daniel expected Sophie Carter to call the police, or lecture him, or hand him a business card for some charity with the careful expression people used when they wanted to feel kind without getting involved. She did none of those things. Instead, she looked at the groceries on the table, then at him. "You said you don't have money." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not tonight." "Then what do you have?" He looked down at his hands, scarred knuckles, grease permanently settled beneath the nails. Hands that had fixed engines, replaced brakes, carried his mother through the hallway when her legs were too weak. "Time," he said, "and 2 working hands." Sophie studied him for a long moment. The security guard shifted near the door. "Miss Carter, I'm not letting him walk away without consequences," Sophie said. Daniel nodded once. "Good." That surprised her. "I'll pay back every dollar," he said, "if you'll let me work it off." The next morning, Daniel reported to Carter Market at 6 a.m. Sophie had made the terms painfully clear. Every hour logged, every task supervised, no special treatment, no cash under the table, no charity disguised as punishment. Until the value of the stolen items was repaid, he would assist with stocking, cleanup, cart returns, and backroom organization. Ava Collins, the store manager, looked him up and down. "So," she said, handing him a name tag marked temp, "you're the most polite criminal in Washington State." Daniel stared at her. Ava shrugged. "What?" "I'm establishing workplace culture." His first task was stocking canned soup. It lasted 11 minutes. One wrong bump from his elbow sent a carefully stacked display collapsing in a metallic avalanche across aisle 4. 24 cans rolled under shelves, between carts, and directly toward an elderly woman comparing crackers. Daniel froze. Ava appeared at the end of the aisle, holding a clipboard. "Impressive," she said. "Most people need training before they destroy inventory architecture." Daniel crouched immediately. "I'll fix it." "I assumed. You have guilt-based productivity." From behind him, Sophie arrived, lips pressed together like she was trying very hard not to smile. Daniel picked up cans, mortified. I'm usually better with machines. Soup is less forgiving, Sophie said. That almost made him laugh. Almost. By the end of the day, Daniel had returned carts in freezing rain, cleaned a spill in dairy, carried heavy bags to customers' cars, and apologized to the soup display twice. What surprised him was the customers, especially the older ones. Mrs. Alvarez needed help reaching oatmeal, and then told him, in detail, about her grandson's disappointing haircut. Mr. Peterson asked if Daniel knew anything about car batteries, then followed him halfway down the aisle, describing a sound his truck made, like a raccoon with regret. Daniel listened. He always did. By the third shift, customers began asking for him by name. Sophie noticed. She also noticed the other things. Daniel never chose the easy job first. If there were carts in the rain, he took them. If there were heavy boxes in the back, he lifted them carefully. Even when his shoulder stiffened, he did not complain. He did not linger. He did not try to charm anyone into lowering the debt. And every break, exactly 5 minutes after sitting down, he called his mother. Yes, Ma, I ate. A pause. No, coffee is not a vegetable. Another pause. I know you raised me better. You mention it hourly. Sophie overheard from the break room doorway once and had to turn away before he saw her smile. Daniel noticed Sophie too, not the polished version customers saw. Not the young owner with perfect posture and calm authority. The other Sophie, the one who arrived before sunrise to check produce quality, the one who fixed crooked price tags herself instead of calling someone else. The one who ate lunch standing behind the office door, usually crackers from a sleeve and lukewarm coffee. One afternoon, he caught her balancing on a step stool to adjust a sign above the bakery section. Should the owner be doing that? He asked. Should the temporary restitution worker be questioning management? The sign is crooked. I know. You're making it more crooked. She looked down at him. Do you want to help or supervise? Depends if supervising counts toward my hours. She laughed before she could stop herself. It was quick, surprised, and warmer than anything he had expected from her. Later that week, Daniel was sent upstairs to retrieve extra receipt paper from the storage office. The door stood open. Inside, on the wall near filing cabinets, hung old framed photos of Carter Market through the years. He paused at one. A teenage girl in a red cashier vest stood behind Register 3, hair tied back, face rounder, smile nervous but stubborn. Sophie. She couldn't have been more than 17. Her name tag was too big for her uniform. She was bagging groceries beside an older man who had Daniel's guess for her father. Sophie entered behind him. That photo is ancient. Daniel looked back at it. You were a cashier? For 4 years. I thought that I was born in an office holding a quarterly report? He felt embarrassed. No. Yes, you did. A little. Sophie stepped beside him, looking at the photo without smiling. My father made me work every position before he let me attend management meetings. Cashier, stock clerk, night inventory, customer complaints. Customer complaints? The real battlefield. Daniel glanced at her. So you know what it feels like to have someone treat you like you're invisible. Her expression changed. For the first time, he saw it clearly. She wasn't just the boss. She wasn't a rich young woman handing consequences down from above. She was someone who had spent years proving she belonged in a place everyone assumed had simply been given to her. Sophie folded her arms. I know what it feels like to be underestimated. Daniel looked at the old photo again, then at her. Guess we have that in common. Something quiet settled between them. Not forgiveness, not romance, not yet, but recognition. And for Daniel, who had walked into Carter Market carrying stolen milk and the weight of his own shame, recognition felt dangerously close to hope. By the third week, Daniel Brooks had become part of Carter Market in the quiet way useful people did. Not officially. Officially, he was still temporary help working off a debt. Unofficially, customers asked where he was when he took lunch. Ava trusted him with the heavy deliveries. The soup display had forgiven him enough to remain standing. Even Sophie had stopped checking his logged hours like she expected him to disappear. Daniel still worked carefully, too carefully sometimes. as if one mistake might prove he had only ever belonged in that security office with stolen groceries on the table. Then, Margaret came in. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon wearing a blue cardigan, orthopedic shoes, and the expression of a woman prepared to inspect the entire establishment for evidence against her son. Daniel spotted her near produce and nearly dropped a crate of oranges. "Ma? What are you doing here?" "Shopping," Margaret said. "People do that in grocery stores. You should have called. I would have brought things home. I wanted to meet the young woman who has you ironing your work shirts." "I don't iron." "You should. That's not the point." Sophie appeared from the bakery aisle with a pricing gun in one hand. Margaret looked her over once, then smiled. "You're Sophie." Sophie blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Do you cook?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Ma." Sophie hesitated. "Sort of." Margaret nodded gravely. "That means no." Ava, passing behind them, whispered, "I love her." Sophie's mouth twitched. "I can make toast." "Toast is not cooking. Toast is bread surviving heat." Daniel wanted the floor to open. Instead, Sophie laughed. Not politely, truly. From then on, Margaret adored her, and because Margaret adored her, Daniel became nervous in a new and entirely inconvenient way. It got worse the night Sophie's car died behind the store. Daniel found her in the parking lot at closing, standing in light rain beside a black sedan that clicked sadly when she turned the key. "It's fine," Sophie said. "I already called roadside assistance." Daniel listened to the engine. "Battery connection. You can tell from that? I used to do this for a living." "I know." The softness in her voice made him look at her. She stepped back. "Do what you do." He fixed it in 12 minutes using a wrench from his truck and a patience Sophie found unfairly attractive. When the engine started, she smiled. "What do I owe you?" Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "Nothing." "It's not in the contract." "Exactly. That means free, or it means I should amend the contract." He gave her a look. "You are a dangerous woman with paperwork, and you are avoiding gratitude." He looked away first. A few days later, Sophie handed him a folder in the break room. Daniel stiffened. "What is that?" "Information, not money, not a favor you have to repay, just information." Inside were applications for a local senior medical assistance program, transportation vouchers for appointments, and a clinic contact who specialized in diabetes management. His pride rose instantly, defensive and hot. "Sophie, I didn't submit anything. I didn't call anyone using your name. I didn't make decisions for you." She kept her voice even. "I just found doors. You decide whether to open them." Daniel stared at the folder. No one had ever helped him like that. Without pushing, without pity, without taking over. He swallowed. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Then, because she looked suddenly uncomfortable with sincerity, she added, "Also, your mother told me you eat canned chili over the sink." Daniel groaned. "She has no loyalty. She has standards." Trust grew that way. In small, awkward repairs. A folder left without pressure. A shared laugh near the loading dock. Margaret sending Sophie banana bread that was technically heart-healthy and emotionally aggressive. Daniel began to see Sophie not as the woman who had caught him, but as the woman who had refused to let his worst night become his entire story. And Sophie began to see Daniel not as a man paying back stolen groceries, but as someone who carried too much alone because he thought asking for help would make him smaller. Then Margaret collapsed. It happened just after midnight. Daniel found her sitting on the bathroom floor, pale and shaking, insisting she was being dramatic, while her blood sugar numbers told a different story. By 1:15 a.m., they were in the emergency room. By 1:40, Daniel was standing beside a vending machine, staring at coffee he had not bought, because buying coffee while his mother lay behind a curtain felt obscene. He had called no one. He didn't know who to call. So when Sophie appeared at 2:03 a.m., in jeans, sneakers, and a sweater thrown on inside out, Daniel thought exhaustion had invented her. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Ava told me. I'm going to fire Ava. She said you'd say that. You don't need to be here." "I know." That answer undid him more than any dramatic speech could have. Sophie didn't bring solutions. She didn't ask for the chart. She didn't try to pay for anything. She simply sat beside him in the hard plastic chairs beneath the fluorescent lights. For a long while, neither spoke. Then she handed him coffee. "I thought buying it for yourself might feel wrong," she said. Daniel looked at the cup, then at her. His voice was rough. "It does. I know." He took it anyway. Hours later, Margaret was stable, sleeping, safe for now. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on knees, his face in his hands. Sophie's shoulder touched his. Not accidentally, not demandingly, just there. And for the first time in months, Daniel understood something he had been too proud and too frightened to name. What he needed most was not money. It was not even a second chance. It was someone who came when there was nothing to fix, someone who stayed. Rumors did not begin loudly. They began in pauses, in glances, in conversations that stopped when Daniel entered the break room. At first, he told himself he was imagining it. He was still the man who had been caught stealing milk after all. Shame had a way of making ordinary silence sound like judgment. Then he heard two stock clerks whispering near the loading dock. "He gets the best shifts now." Of course he does. The boss likes him. Daniel stood behind a stack of boxes, frozen. The words were not shouted. That made them worse. By the next week, the rumor had spread far enough to reach the main office. Victor Hale, Sophie's financial advisor, requested a private meeting with her. Victor was not cruel. That was the problem. Cruel people were easy to dismiss. Victor was calm, experienced, and almost always reasonable. "Sophie," he said, sitting across from her desk. "I'm concerned." She already knew why. "Daniel has repaid the value of the stolen items," Victor continued. "And yet he's still here. He's a good worker. I don't doubt that. But perception matters. A man caught stealing from your store is now receiving continued hours, personal attention, and what some employees believe is protection from ownership." Sophie's face tightened. "He isn't being protected. Maybe not. But if your employees believe rules bend depending on your feelings, you have a problem." The words stayed with her all day. Because Victor was not entirely wrong. Daniel had become valuable, dependable, liked by customers, helpful to staff. But Sophie also knew she looked for him when she entered the store. She knew his break times. She knew Margaret's appointment schedule. She knew the exact way his face softened when he saw his mother's name on his phone. And she had to ask herself the question she hated most. Was she still being fair? Daniel sensed the shift before Sophie said anything. She stopped lingering near his aisle. She became more formal. Not cold exactly, but careful. The carefulness hurt more than anger would have. One afternoon, Ava found him in the back room lifting crates with more force than necessary. "Hey, ethical shoplifter," she said. "The boxes didn't start the rumor." Daniel set one down. "You heard? I hear everything. I'm management and nosy." He gave a tired laugh, but it died quickly. Ava's expression softened. "For what it's worth, most people like you. Most isn't all." "No, it never is." Daniel looked toward the sales floor, where Sophie was speaking with a vendor, professional and composed. "She shouldn't have to defend me," he said. Ava said nothing. That was how he knew she agreed, at least a little. The final push came 2 days later, when an employee Daniel barely knew muttered, "Must be nice to steal from the boss and get rewarded." Daniel did not respond. He simply finished stacking the shelf, clocked out, and went home to find Margaret knitting in her chair. "You look like a man about to do something noble and stupid," she said. He kissed her forehead. "That specific? I raised you." Unfortunately, the next morning, Daniel arrived early. Sophie was in her office, reviewing invoices. She looked up when he knocked. "Daniel?" He stepped inside and placed his final timesheet on her desk. The balance was paid, every hour recorded, every dollar accounted for. Sophie looked at the paper, then back at him. "What is this?" "My last sheet." Her face went still. "You're quitting. I'm done paying back what I took. You don't have to leave because people are talking." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do. No. You don't. Sophie. Her name and his voice stopped her. Daniel stood straight, but his eyes were tired. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. I won't repay that by becoming a problem you have to defend. That's not your decision to make. It is if staying costs you the respect you've spent your whole life earning. Sophie's jaw tightened. So you're protecting my reputation by taking away my choice? He flinched, because the accusation was fair. I'm trying not to turn your kindness into another mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Maybe not. But people are making it look like one. For a moment, neither moved. Sophie wanted to tell him to stay, wanted to remind him he had earned his place, wanted to be selfish enough to keep him close. But she also saw the shame in his face. If she used her authority to hold him there, even gently, she would prove every rumor right in his mind. So she did the hardest thing. She let him choose. Daniel removed his name tag and set it beside the timesheet. Tell Ava I said thank you. You can tell her yourself. He almost smiled. She'll yell. She will. He turned toward the door. Daniel. He looked back. Sophie's voice was softer now. What happened that night doesn't define you. His eyes held hers. No, he said, but what I do after it has to. Then he left. Sophie sat very still after the door closed. For several minutes, she looked at the name tag on her desk. Then at the timesheet. Then at the office window overlooking the store floor, where Daniel's absence already seemed louder than his presence had ever been. And for the first time since her father died, Sophie Carter put her head down on her desk and cried. A few months passed. Daniel did not return to Carter Market. Not because he stopped thinking about it. He thought about it too often. He thought about aisle 4, where the soup display had once defeated him. He thought about Ava calling him an ethical shoplifter. He thought about Sophie standing on a step stool, making a bakery sign worse with CEO-level confidence. Mostly, he thought about the office door closing behind him. But leaving had done what staying could not. It gave him room to stand on his own. Daniel found work with a maintenance equipment company on the south side of Seattle, not through Sophie, not through Carter Market, not through anyone's sympathy. He applied, interviewed, took a practical skills test, fixed a conveyor motor in 22 minutes while the supervisor watched with raised eyebrows. You always work this quietly? The man asked. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. Machines don't improve because you yell at them. He got the job. The pay was steady. The hours were better. The insurance paperwork was annoying but real. Margaret improved too. Not magically. She still had bad days. She still pretended vegetables were a government conspiracy. But with the medical assistance program and steadier meals, her numbers became less frightening. Sometimes Daniel found her sitting at the kitchen table, smiling at her phone. Who are you texting? He asked once. No one. That is the guiltiest no one I've ever heard. Margaret adjusted her glasses. A lady is entitled to privacy. You're texting Sophie. I said privacy, not lying. Sophie, meanwhile, kept running Carter Market. She did not collapse without him, which was both comforting and mildly insulting. She handled vendor issues, staffing problems, seasonal inventory, and a freezer malfunction that Ava described as a dairy hostage situation. She also learned that missing someone did not mean she had made the wrong leadership decision. Victor noticed the change in her before she admitted it. One afternoon, after reviewing quarterly reports, he closed the folder and said, "For what it's worth, I misjudged him." Sophie looked up. "Daniel," Victor said. "He could have taken advantage of the situation. He didn't." "No," Sophie said softly. "He didn't." Victor sighed. "You cared about him." Sophie gave him a warning look. "I'm old, not blind." She almost smiled. Then Margaret invited her to dinner. Sophie should have suspected a trap. The invitation was too innocent. Margaret claimed she had made too much food, which Sophie doubted because Margaret measured leftovers like a military resource. Still, she went. Daniel opened the door and froze. Sophie stood on the porch holding flowers in one hand and a pie in the other. Behind him, Margaret called, "Don't just stand there like a decorative fence post. Let the woman in." Daniel turned. "Ma, what?" She brought pie. Pie outranks awkwardness. Dinner was warm, chaotic, and suspiciously well planned. Margaret served chicken, vegetables, and grilled cheese because Sophie needs remedial training. Sophie accepted this diagnosis with dignity. Daniel and Sophie were polite at first, too polite, the kind of politeness that made Margaret roll her eyes so hard Daniel worried about her blood pressure. Finally, Margaret set down her fork. "I'm old," she announced. "Not dead, and certainly not patient." Daniel closed his eyes. "Here we go. The debt was paid months ago," Margaret said. "The rest is just two stubborn people pretending math is the problem." Sophie's face flushed. Daniel stared at his plate. Margaret continued. "You stole groceries. Terrible decision. Very dramatic. Would not recommend. You paid it back. She gave you a chance. Also dramatic. Possibly bad for her blood pressure. Now you both keep acting like kindness creates prison sentences." No one spoke. Margaret pointed at them with her fork. "Love is not on an invoice." After dinner, Sophie helped clear plates despite Margaret insisting guests should sit and be admired. Daniel followed her onto the porch when she stepped outside for air. The evening was cool. The sky bruised purple over the quiet street. For a while they stood side by side. Then Daniel said, "I stole groceries because I was desperate." Sophie looked at him. "I'm not proud of it. I never will be." "I know," he swallowed. "But I stayed because of you." Her expression softened. "Not because I owed you," he said. "Not by the end. I stayed because you looked at me on the worst night of my life and still expected me to be better." Sophie smiled, faintly. "Good. Good? Because I never wanted the groceries back anyway." Daniel turned toward her. "Then what did you want?" "The truth," she said. "I wanted you to tell the truth about what happened. I wanted you to have a way back that didn't require you to pretend you hadn't fallen." His eyes held hers. "And now? Now I want you to stop acting like caring about me is another debt you have to repay." The words moved through him slowly. For months, Daniel had carried love like a balance due, something dangerous, something that could be misunderstood, miscounted, held against them both. But standing there with Sophie, while his mother hummed loudly inside the kitchen to prove she was not listening, Daniel finally let the debt end. He reached for Sophie's hand. Just as Daniel, she took it. Inside, Margaret shouted, "If you're kissing, do it where I don't have to pretend not to know." Sophie laughed, startled and bright. Daniel groaned. "I'm moving out." "You can't," Margaret called. "I like her better." Sophie leaned her shoulder against his. For the first time, there was no rescuer and no rescued, no boss and no thief, no unpaid balance between them. Only two grown people who had seen each other clearly in shame, in strength, in loneliness, in stubborn hope, and chosen to take one honest step closer. Before we leave Daniel and Sophie's story behind, let's take a moment to think about what it was really about. At first glance, this story seems to be about stolen groceries. A man desperate enough to make a terrible decision. A store owner kind enough to give him a second chance. But underneath that, it's really about something much deeper. It's about dignity. Daniel wasn't starving for charity. He was starving for a way to keep his self-respect. And Sophie didn't help him by pretending what he did was okay. She helped him by refusing to reduce him to the worst thing he had ever done. Sometimes the most meaningful kindness isn't removing every consequence. Sometimes it's giving someone a path back to themselves. And maybe that's the lesson here. People are more than their worst day, more than their biggest mistake, more than the moment they're most ashamed of. The right person doesn't ignore your flaws. They simply refuse to believe your flaws are the entire story. Imagine you're standing in Sophie's office that night. A man has just been caught stealing food. You know what he did was wrong, but you also know why he did it. What would you have done? Would you have called the police? Given him another chance? Or tried to find a path somewhere between justice and compassion? There's rarely an easy answer. And that's what makes stories like this feel so human. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe people deserve a second chance after making a serious mistake? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might encourage someone who's struggling right now. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next story on Soul-Stirring Stories. And remember, sometimes the people who enter our lives on our worst day become the reason we believe in better days again.